Welcome back. You're watching The Big Idea. During the 2008-2009 global financial crisis, the saying, when the US sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold, resonated profoundly. That's as the economic impact rippled across the globe significantly, including South Africa. Now today, amidst fiscal hurdles, South Africa continues to face economic challenges. Could steps taken after the crisis help to avoid the situation the economy currently finds itself in? Joining us to unpack this in greater detail is Dawie, Roodt, Chief Economist at Efficient Group, and Azar, Jammine, Chief Economist at Econometrics. Thank you so much for your time, gents. Now, I went to an event towards the end of last year where the CEO of a JSE-listed company actually said, in South Africa, we didn't really fix things after the global financial crisis. And it got me thinking, is the economic foundation shaky, and how fragile is our economy to further shocks? So I actually just want to start off with that period before the 2008-2009 global financial crisis, because for 17 years we had not experienced a recession in South Africa. And I actually want to know, starting off with you, Azar, does that paint a good picture of the economy before the crisis, or at least in that period between 1994 and 2007?
The beauty of the situation in the 15 years between 1994 and 2008-09 is that South Africa's economy recovered from being a desperately depleted economy during the final decade of apartheid and managed to grow in line with the rest of the world. I won't say that the performance was stellar, but it was relatively strong, and the country was certainly not underperforming the rest of the world. And financially, we were in a very sound position when the global financial crisis came on stream. The public debt to GDP ratio had declined from a peak of around 48% in 1998 to around 22% in 2007-08. So we had the capacity to then use government funds to extricate ourselves from the ravages of the global financial crisis. And we ended up having a contraction in the economy of just 1.5%, which was actually quite limited compared with the kind of recession that many other developing and developed economies endured, mainly because we were resilient enough and had the fiscal means to actually get ourselves out of that mess. The problem that we encountered was that era coincided with a change in regime in South Africa. Yes, it was still ANC, but basically it was a different government. Now, under Jacob Zuma, and he just emaciated all the institutions in the country, as we know, introduced state capture, and embarked upon a program to use the country's abundant resources, really, its healthy financial position, to start spending money massively on employing more and more civil servants who would basically provide him with the support that he needed politically. And instead of embarking upon major infrastructural investment to address service delivery problems that we see on a daily basis right now. And that was the tragedy of our story around the global financial crisis. We did manage to get out of it quite well through spending a lot of money, but we spent on the wrong things.
It's quite interesting to see the link between the pillars of the economy and also what is happening politically. I want to come to you, Dawie. I mean, what were the things that we had right before 2008 that maybe would they be hard to replicate now?
Well, no, it's not that difficult to replicate it now, but I think some of the major things that we saw, and everything didn't go well, just by the way, from 1994 until 2008-9, everything didn't go well. There were certain signs that, for example, the weapons scandal that we had during then, that I think that was kind of the beginning of things that really started going horribly wrong after 2008, 2009. But a couple of things that happened, for example, when Trevor Manuel took over as the Minister of Finance then, one of the first things that he started doing was to privatize. He started selling state assets, and that was a huge about to from the previous policies of the ANC. The ANC, as let's call them a socialist kind of government, they talked about the nationalization of the mines at the beginning. And what happened is that Trevor Manuel and the ANC basically privatized a lot of stuff, and that also supported the fiscal accounts. From 2008, of course, there was a huge change in government in South Africa, political change in government, and things started going horribly wrong. Azar mentioned the fiscal accounts, and the fiscal accounts are even worse today. It's never been as bad as it is at the moment. So we simply do not have the capacity to catch the economy if something should go wrong, as an example. But yes, we can still turn it around. But in order to turn it around, you have to have the right ideology, you have to have the right government, you have to have the right policy, and very importantly, you have to have the skills in government to be able to implement the right kind of policies. We've got none of those. We don't have the right ideology, not the right policies, and certainly not the skills in the current government.
Yeah. Also fascinating that you mentioned the privatization during Trevor Manuel's tenure. And of course, right now we know that because a lot of state entities have been in the doldrums, there's a lot of privatization now that needs to be put back into the ecosystem. Azar, I want to come to you. I mean, just now going to the 2008 global financial crisis, and I know obviously that you've said that, you know, the hit also coincided with the change of political regime. But what were the economic pillars that were mostly hurt during the financial crisis?
I'm sorry, what were the economic pillars?
That were mostly hurt during the global financial crisis.
Well, essentially, you know, we were still a primary supplier of commodities to the rest of the world. And with a global financial crisis and a sharp decline in economies such as those of the United States and China and Europe, we saw a massive hit on our ability to export. Fortunately, we did endure a big depreciation of the currency that helped insulate us from the full effects of those commodity price declines, but not to the full extent that needed to have been the case.
Our banking system, Dawie, is seen as very strong. Would you say that it's largely been unscathed by the crises?
Yeah, can I just make a comment about privatization as well? I spoke about privatization, but very ironically, what is happening at the moment is that we are in fact privatizing a lot of that stuff. But it's not privatization in the normal sense of the word. It's privatization through the back door in a way, because the state is just not capable of doing that. And also what I would like to mention, what happens in 2008-9, as economists, that was a very interesting, well, at least I think economists find that time very interesting, because worldwide, not only in South Africa, did we see two major changes happening. One is the way that monetary policy was conducted. We heard about things like, for example, quantitative easing and governments buying all these financial instruments. And we thought, many economists thought that that's really some new experiments that's going to blow up in the face of central banks, as an example. That's something that changed dramatically internationally. But also, we've seen a huge increase in state debt. Since then, it's not only South Africa that saw this huge increase in state debt. Many other countries in the world, particularly the United States, they've got some serious fiscal problems ahead if they don't start making some serious changes. In the case of South Africa, of course, we don't have the US dollar as a currency to back us up. We've got a small currency called the South African currency, the rand, and we've got very, very weak economic growth. And those are things that is undermining the economic growth performance in South Africa. It is undermining job creation. It's increasing poverty in South Africa. And we just don't have the fiscal depth anymore. But I want to emphasize again, I think we've got a major skills issue in government. Government that's simply not equipped to manage these kind of problems that we have.
Yeah. Just sticking with you, Dawie, on our banking system, do you think that it has been largely left unscathed?
But pretty much so, yes. And that's not necessarily a good thing, by the way. The South African banks are very healthy. They're very well capitalized. But banking in South Africa is quite expensive. It is very difficult. So the South African Reserve Bank is a very, very strict master. It's very difficult to get a banking license in South Africa. And the Reserve Bank is very strict on the banks. And that means that there's just not enough competition amongst the banks. I would like to see more competition amongst the banks, but that simply means that now and again a bank will fall over as well. We've seen some banks falling over in South Africa, but that's simply because of corruption, like the VBS Bank, as an example. But and I must warn about this, it is not only me, the Reserve Bank as well. They did indicate that they're getting concerned about the banks funding the fiscal deficit more and more. That's not a problem yet, but the Reserve Bank is getting a little bit concerned about that. The foreigners are selling our debt, and the banks are picking up that debt. And because of this huge rising fiscal deficit and debt levels, we are heading for some serious financial problems in this country.
Yeah. Azar, come the COVID-19 pandemic, do you think that there were opportunities that we missed during that time between the global financial crisis and the pandemic that maybe we could have capitalized on to ensure that the economy is insulated even a little bit from some of these shocks?
And unfortunately, by the time we got to 2019 and 2020, the financial and fiscal situation in the country had deteriorated enormously. And so the capacity for South Africa's government to intervene to actually stimulate the economy was far, far more limited. As Dawie mentioned, we don't have a currency such as the dollar to rely upon. And so our government had to really embark upon very, very limited kind of fiscal stimulus at the time. And was unable to really support the South African economy in the manner in which, for example, the US government and many of the European governments were able to intervene. Ironically, that is the very reason why they have such high debt levels. And I might add that Dawie is absolutely correct. One of the outcomes of the global financial crisis was a massive increase in global public debt. We were not the only ones, and we can maybe be very grateful that we had limited capacity to embark upon fiscal stimulus after the coronavirus crisis, because precisely because those countries that were able to embark upon it, especially the US, are potentially running into huge problems as a consequence. Our public debt level, ironically, is quite a lot lower than that of many developed economies. The problem is that our interest rates, our long-term interest rates, the debt servicing costs on our debt are proportionately so much higher than they are in the developed world. And as a consequence, even though we have lower levels of public debt still than they do, our debt servicing costs are a lot higher relative to the size of our economy than theirs is. And that is a potentially major problem.
Yeah, and that's also a very interesting point. Yeah, Dawie, you can add there.
Let me add to that as well. You know, when you talk about a public debt or state debt, usually we mean the central government debt, the central debt of what the Minister of Finance is responsible for. But what's been happening recently is the local authorities deteriorated to such an extent, and the state-owned enterprises also deteriorated to such an extent that they're all knocking on the door of the Minister of Finance to try to bail them out as well. So if you really want to look at debt in South Africa, you actually have to consolidate the debt of the local authorities and the state-owned enterprises, all of that, into the national debt of the state to get a better picture, a better idea of what the debt situation in South Africa is. And if you do it that way, then I must tell you, things are really, really looking bad. And the problem is not only the interest, as Azar mentioned, but it's the rate of increase of this debt that we have to be very concerned about as well.
So you would say, because I mean, as much as Azar says that, you know, the public debt picture is much higher in other countries than ours, would you still say that for our economy it is unsustainable, Dawie?
It is totally unsustainable, but also remember the rich countries, the rich world, the US debt levels is close to 100%, much higher than ours. The interest is much lower. But if you compare South Africa to other emerging economies, then our debt is certainly on the high side. We've got very, very high debt compared to other emerging economies as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, we must wrap up the conversation. So I'd like one more closing comment from each of you. Of course, now we've had these crises and lots of things have been done. Azar, just coming to you, I mean, what are some of the lessons that South Africa should be learning or should have learnt from these crises, because there could be another shock at some point?
Absolutely. Fortunately, I don't believe we've got the capacity now to deal with another shock by spending massively fiscally. The lesson that we have learned is that when you want to start stimulating the economy, you don't do so by employing public servants in their hundreds of thousands to help support and give you support, but rather to actually try and improve the services that are available in society through appropriate infrastructural investment. And we have not done that in the past. And hopefully we'll do that in the future. One hopes that the government is not tempted to simply add more social grants to the story to help the increasing hordes of unemployed people, and rather devotes whatever money is needed to the infrastructure of the country, which in itself will start seeing new job opportunities being created to absorb the people far more eloquently than simply giving them cash in their hands to survive.
Lastly, Dawie, on your side, I mean, we've been talking about structural reforms for a long time. We have the SONA coming up today, where we're hoping to get more developments on that. Do you think that in order to insulate the economy from more shocks, we need to concentrate on that, or is the picture bigger than that?
Yeah, I have to add to what Azar said, and I totally agree with him, of course. So we know what the problems are. We know how to fix the problem. It's really not difficult. We know exactly what to do. The problem is politics gets in the way. And tonight we're going to listen to the president. He's going to say a couple of things about the state of the nation. He's going to make promises, and there's an election around the corner, and that is the reality. Under these kind of circumstances, no politician wants to really do what's supposed to be happening. And because if you do what's supposed to be happening, people get angry at you and people tend not to vote for you. So that is the problem. So I think perhaps the biggest challenge in South Africa is not economics, it's politics.
All right, I hear you. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights today, gents, on what has gone wrong and maybe some of the opportunities that we do need to capitalize on in the future, so that our economy is found solid if another economic shock does come through at some point. That was Dawie Roodt, Chief Economist at Efficient Group, and Azar Jammine, who is the Chief Economist at Econometrics.